Okay. Okay. So there are many stories about the father of the Alter Rebbe, and most of the stories are in the Sefer HaZachonos, in the book of memoirs, the previous Rebbe. But I want to share a few stories that occurred later on in the life of Rav Baruch, the Alter Rebbe's father, after the Alter Rebbe already became Rebbe. There was an issue that Rav Baruch had, the Alter Rebbe's father. The issue he had was a question in halacha about the honor you're supposed to give your father and the honor that a father is allowed to accept from his son when his son is his teacher. If a father learns from a teacher, if a father learns from his son, who is supposed to honor who? So ordinarily, it's not such a question, but if your son is in the caliber of the Alter Rebbe, then it becomes a real question. So because the Alter Rebbe would stand up in the presence of his father, and his father considered himself to be a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, so he had a real issue what to do, because he didn't want the Alter Rebbe to stand in his presence, and he wanted to stand in the Alter Rebbe's presence. The Alter Rebbe wanted, so it was a halachic issue, and there's also an issue of respect and honor. He felt, as he said, the Baruch, the Alter Rebbe's father said, if the Shekhinah, if the divine presence is speaking from the throat of my son, how could he stand up in front of me? That's what the Baruch said. So because of that, he left Liyashna, he left the city of the Alter Rebbe, and instead he wandered far away to a city at that time which was part of Hungary, the Selyish. Selyish is in the Carpathian Mountains, and when he got there, he visited the home of this wealthy Jew who had a inn, he had a bar, and the very first day after Baruch stayed in his house, he saw that he had godly success, miraculous success in his bar. And the same thing happened the next day and the next day. And he put two and two together, and he realized, in the same way that Levin said about Yaakov, that Hashem has blessed me because of your arrival. He realized that it must be because of Rabbi Baruch is in his home. That's why he has such incredible success. And he asked Rabbi Baruch to stay in his home. Rabbi Baruch agreed to stay in his home, but he wanted to pay. This was a wealthy man. And he said, please don't pay. I just want you to stay in my home. You don't have to pay anything. Because he pushed, so the Alter Rebbe's father, Rabbi Baruch, agreed to stay there. And he stayed there the rest of his life. When before he passed away, he told his host that he has several sons. He gave him the address of two of his sons. And the third son, the Alter Rebbe, Reb Zalman, he told his host, Ervet Alein Wissen, he will know himself when I pass away. Don't have to tell him anything, he'll know himself. And the previous Rebbe was actually in Yud Shvat, was coming up this week. On Rebbe Baumgarten writes in his memoirs how he was present when the Rebbe, our Rebbe, was at a Farbrengen of the previous Rebbe. The previous Rebbe on Yud Shvat was talking about the father of the Alter Rebbe. And he mentioned how Rav Moshe Valenker, a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, a famous chassid, who it's written a lot about him in Hayom Yom, what kind of a unique person he was. So Rav Moshe Valenker was in Yechidus, was in a private audience with the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe, in the middle of the audience, he said, I became a Yasam, I became an orphan at this exact moment. So our Rebbe asked the previous Rebbe if the Alter Rebbe realized that he had lost his father through a HaKadosh, with divine inspiration, did he also start keeping the customs of mourning or not? So in response, the previous Rebbe just laughed. He didn't say anything. Rav Shmuel Levitin, who was a prominent chassid and a prominent rabbi, prominent rav, he said to our Rebbe that since the halacha is that if someone drowns in water you don't actually see them pass away. Top of Mayim Shein Lem Sof, if someone passes away in water that has no end, so halacha is that you do not you don't mourn, and therefore a similar thing. If you know with divine inspiration, it's a similar kind of thing, and therefore he thinks that's the halachic reason why the Alter Rebbe didn't begin mourning at that time, even though he knew with divine inspiration, still he wasn't going to mourn because of that. The matzeva of the Alter Rebbe's father has his name a little bit different than the name that we know him as. We know him as Baruch, but it has his name there as well as Yisroel. And there are different opinions, brought different svar and different books about the family of Rabbi Baruch. Has written many svar and many books about their great-great-grandfather. And in the Sefer Eitan Tzion, it says that just like Rabbi Baruch didn't want being around the Alter Rebbe because of the question of respect, he also stopped using the name Yisrael. He changed his name from Yisrael and stopped using the name Yisrael because of respect for the Baal Shem Tov. Just like you're not supposed to call your teacher by his name, so since his name was the same as Baal Shem Tov, he wanted to stop using the name Yisrael in respect for the Baal Shem Tov, so that he shouldn't be using the name of Baal Shem Tov. Anyway, so the Alter Rebbe, after the passing of Reb Baruch, according to Rabbi Broin, who was one of the first presidents of the Satmar Hasidim in Williamsburg, in America, New York, according to Chaim Broin, who wrote a book about his family, Toldos Chaim. According to him, the Alter Rebbe wanted to, not only according to him, there's also another book which the previous Rebbe said it was a reliable book. It's a book you can rely on, that what he's saying is accurate. And Base Rebbe, it took many years for the author of this book to get together all the facts. So Rabbi Chaim Hillman wrote extensively about the history of Chabad Lubavitch. So he also writes in the book, the same as Rabbi Broin, that the Alter Rebbe, after his father passed away, wanted to pay this person who had hosted his father for so many years. He also wanted to pay as well the Chevra Kadisha for burying his father. He wanted to pay for the burial. And he sent a special messenger to Hungary to make the payment. But the host, this wealthy man, and the Chevra Kadisha refused to take the money. And they said that, we want to do this in his honor because we loved him, and therefore we don't want to accept any money. But the emissary, the Alter Rebbe, said, listen, I was sent by a holy man. And if you're not going to listen to him when a tzaddik is, you don't want to mess with the tzaddik, basically. Messing with the tzaddik, there could be some kind of negative energy there. So they went to a best, and they went to a Jewish court, and the Jewish court ruled that the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, is obligated to accept the money. However, the host is not obligated to accept the money, doesn't have to accept it. But hundreds of years later, this same Chaim Meir Broin, he never was blessed with children, and he had a nephew who had left Judaism, stopping from, and he was in an audience with the Rebbe. And he told the Rebbe the following words. He says, my grandfather, he says that he is the descendant of this wealthy man that had hosted the Alter Rebbe. He said, my grandfather, was a host of your grandfather. And your grandfather wanted to pay my grandfather. But my grandfather didn't want to accept the money. But I want to take it. I want to pay payment for the favor that my grandfather gave to your grandfather. The payment I want to have is a blessing that my nephew should return to Judaism. And the Rebbe responded and gave him a blessing, according to his testimony. The Rebbe agreed because if he had a claim, he deserves a unique blessing. The Rebbe was very interested to know about the history of Reb Baruch. In fact, Rebbe wrote a letter in 1951 to the Spinker Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Weiss, asking him. He lived in that city, in Selish. In fact, he would go every month to visit the caver, the resting place of Reb Baruch. It was known for generations where the resting place was. In fact, there's still a family that keeps, not only their Chabad Shluchim in the area as well, who visit and know, and the resting place of Reb Baruch. It's interesting. The other tombstones from the time of Reb Baruch 200, 300 years ago, they're all, you can't read them anymore. But because Reb Baruch's tombstone was written in more of a simple way, it was only engraved on stone without any ink, without anything else, because it wasn't made properly, it actually endured until today, and it's still possible to read his name. So actually, when the Alter Rebbe's letters were printed, the Rebbe told the librarian of the Rebbe's library, Rebbe Levin, to publish a picture of the monument of Reb Baruch, and unfortunately he wasn't able to find the picture at the time. They told him how to find it, but in the newer print, there's a picture of the monument. They also wanted to decipher actually, I think they didn't. They did make it into the first printing. Didn't make it in the first print. Anyways, they also wanted to decipher the wording of the monument as well. Anyways, so the Alter Rebbe himself visited Selish to go to his father's caver. There are two different traditions of when the Alter Rebbe visited. Some say the Alter Rebbe visited a few years later, and the Alter Rebbe took a minion to the cave of his father, and he took off his shoes, asked his father forgiveness for not being there. On the other hand, there's another tradition from the Minchas Yitzchak, wrote to the Rebbe that the Alter Rebbe came there right during the year of his father's passing, and he spent Yom Kippur 2 days after the yahrzeit of his father. His father's yahrzeit is in the 8th of Tishrei. He spent that Yom Kippur in Munkash. However, according to the talks of the previous Rebbe, it's clear that the first tradition is more accurate, because the Alter Rebbe wasn't in Munkash that specific year. Either way, so the it's just fascinating how Reb Chaim Meir Broin collected on this on the favor of his great-great-grandfather, and thereby was able to make his nephew return Levin to our Father in heaven. And that's the story I wanted to share. And good Tavach, Sur Davis. Questions or comments? Okay, good Tavach.